My name is Laurence Sims. I'm the new Irish Joint Secretary here in Belfast, and it is my great pleasure to welcome all of you here in the room. It feels a long time since I've said those words. I don't think I've seen so many people together, and it's a great relief and a joy to feel the energy of this evening here, and to welcome all the people who are joining by live stream, of which I know there are a great number. So I'm told I have to stand exactly here so that you can all see me, but we're in for a wonderful evening of conversation and of music indeed, all to celebrate this book, Jan Carson's The Raptures, which I have a strong feeling that everybody in this room has read already, but if they haven't, there is an opportunity to rectify this indeed at the table over there. So thank you, Jan, for letting us host this evening for you and celebrating this wonderful book. And thank you to Hilary as well for guiding the conversation later about Jan's writing and Jan's books. Anybody who's read this book, as I say, most of you I'm sure have, and anybody who's read Jan's other books know that they are full of honesty and imagination and skill and above all empathy. It's been a joy to read it. I'm looking forward to this conversation hugely. As I was saying to a few people in my previous role for the Department of Foreign Affairs back in Dublin, covering some of the issues around Northern Ireland, I didn't get to do the fun stuff. I didn't get to do the literary stuff and the art stuff, so it's wonderful to be here this evening and be part of tonight. I'm told I don't need to go on in my welcome, don't need to go on in my introduction, because we have a much better way to set the tone for this evening and to introduce this conversation. As all of you who've read The Raptures know, music, and particularly 1990s music, the greatest era of popular music, plays a wonderful part in it and a recurring part in it. And so to set the tone for the conversation between Hilary and Jan and hopefully everybody in the room later on, we are very lucky to have Ferna to play us in. So I would just like to thank Ferna for doing a much better job than I possibly could of introducing this evening. And so, Ferna, the stage is yours. Thank you very much.
In case you haven't attended one of Jan's launches before, Jan likes to sort of torment me with new musical challenges every time she releases a book. So for her postcard stories, I had to do a postman themed song medley. For the fire starters, I did a fire song medley and completely butchered Billy Joel. So for tonight, we have a 1993 mega mix. So you can strap yourselves in for this. So here we go. One, two, princes kneel before you. That's what I said now. Princes who adore you. Just go ahead now. One has diamonds in his pocket, and that's some bread now. This one wants to buy you rockets, ain't in his head now. Marry him or marry me. I'm the one that loved you, baby, can't you see? Ain't got no future or a family tree, but I know what a prince and lover ought to be. I know what a prince and lover ought to be, and I'll always love you. much. I think you get extra wine if you can guess all the song titles for that one. I'm going to do one more, which is thankfully my own song, so I can remember all the words. It's called Lapsed. I was asked this year to write a song that would kind of capture the state of Northern Ireland, the north of Ireland, in it how it is today, which is a bit of a minefield, has to be said. But I wrote something, and it's sort of imagining if Northern Ireland, this part of the world, was a person, what might it say? And I think some of the themes that kind of struggle between simple faith maybe and reality and how those things interact, I think maybe tied in a bit with Jan's book. So that's my little segue into the next section. So I'll play this for you, and then hopefully you'll get to hear from Jan soon. So here we go. I'm getting born again, not for the first time. Promise is comforting, at least for a while. Have you ever wondered why I can't seem to live with myself? Have you ever asked if I really do want to be made well? Oh, I can behave when I want to. I have been brave when I didn't, but I'm never not afraid, so I'm always getting saved. I'm getting praised again, despite all my vices. I'll see you around, old friend, at my next crisis. Have you ever wondered why you can't seem to get out of this hell? Have you ever asked if you really do want me to get well? Oh, I can behave when I want to. I have been brave when I didn't, but I'm never not afraid, so I'm always getting saved. Do you know what that does to a heartbeat? Do you know I take up with any old creep? 'Cause I'm never not afraid, so I'm always getting saved. Learning to walk at my age, learning to talk at my stage. Oh, it isn't pretty, but I swear there could be an unforeseen grace in a hand reaching out to an empty space, to a voice crying out in the void. I believe, I believe, I believe, I believe. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Great. My name is Hilary Copeland, and I am delighted to welcome you to the launch of The Raptures by Jan Carson. Our thanks to our host tonight, the Joint Secretary in Belfast, who are making this event possible and also making it available online. So a very warm welcome to all of you, no matter where you are joining us from. I would like to thank Ferna for those beautiful tunes that we just heard. We will be coming back to the 1990s later on whenever we're exploring some of the contents of Jan's book. The format for the rest of the evening is that they'll have a brief conversation between Jan and I, and we will also then be asking for some questions from the audience. So please do start thinking about those now, because we'd love to hear from you. A quick heads up for anybody who is unfamiliar with the Raptures. This book contains recurring themes of illness and child death. It's treated with empathy and good dose of black humour, but do bear this in mind in case these are topics that you find difficult. And just to say that books will be available to buy after the event from the world's best booksellers, No Alibis Bookstore, who are here with us in person tonight. Very much deserve that round of applause. And if you're not with us tonight, I still recommend that you buy your books from No Alibis. I'd like to introduce you to tonight's guest, and I had quite a long bio prepared, and yet I feel that perhaps most of you might know who she is. So I will say this: Jan Carson is a writer and community arts facilitator who is based in Belfast, and The Raptures, your 7th book, was published by Doubleday in January 2022. Please put your hands together for Jan Carson. Jan, the most important question, I was asked this earlier today, and I just want to sort of get this out of the way at this point. Is the most relevant baked good appropriate for tonight's book launch a tray bake or a themed shortbread?
Well, Hilary, that is a very good and also controversial question, as we all know. I actually think, where's Neve? Neve, we do have tray bakes, don't we? We do. Yeah, so we've actually gone down a very bipartisan road of having both. So there will be tray bakes immediately afterwards, and then you will all get to go home with some of my mother's fantastic shortbread little people. And I think that deserves a round of applause for Joy Carson's shortbread. Paul McVeigh, can you give us a taste sample?
Highly recommended. I think given the location we're in, that is entirely appropriate approach. Jan, would you like to say a few words of thanks to everyone tonight?
Is this where I have to thank you, Hills?
No.
Okay. First of all, it's just kind of overwhelming looking out at all of the folks here tonight. Like many of you, I haven't been in a room with this many people for a long time, so I'll just take a wee moment and look at you all. You've all brushed up really well for tonight, so thank you for coming along. I'm going to run through these thanks really quickly because they are boring, but they're really, really heartfelt, and a lot of people deserve a lot of thanks for getting us to this point tonight. So can I first of all thank very much the Secretariat here, the Joint Secretary, who I've been calling the Vice President all night. Not yet, but watch this space. This is Laurence, is one of his first, your first? So can we welcome him to Belfast? You're stepping into some very big shoes with Kevin and Siobhan, so I would suggest you get yourself down to No Alibis very quickly and start reading a lot. But I imagine we're going to see a lot more of Laurence in the next wee while, and he'll want to get to know you all, so please come and say hello to him afterwards. Also a huge thanks to Neve and Catherine, who have done incredible amounts of work getting this together, and all of the wonderful ladies at the back who've seen fit to even bring Schlur tonight, bringing a wee bit of Ballymena to Belfast. So thank you so much for that. Thank you very much to my fantastic best agent in the entire world. Kate is here. This is Kate here. Actually, please give her a wee. So So, if you've got a manuscript in your pocket, beat a wee path straight to her afterwards. She's always looking for somebody else, even poets, Michal. So thank you so much, Kate, for just always being there and always having my back and actually coming from Bristol today. So that's fantastic. We've already thanked David and the No Alibis crew. They go above and beyond every time. David's not here at the minute, so he's gone above and beyond home. So we're thanking John tonight. I just appreciate them so much. For a lot of us, they are a second home in Belfast, and they really got a lot of us through the last wee while, keeping us in books, but also in community and welcome and hospitality. So keep buying your books for them and keep them in business. My two lovely friends who've been there for a lot the last decade, Hannah, who you heard playing tonight as Ferna, and Hills here. It is a lovely thing to be up front playing and gigging with your mates and to know they're not going to ask you any awkward questions. I'll just put that caveat in. Yes. Also, another absolutely legend, and I'm going to ask for a round of applause for this man because he's always there in the background, literally always, going above and beyond with helping with sound and tech and emails late at night. I don't know how to fix this, Alan. How do you do it? If Alan Meban has ever helped you out with anything, can you please put your hands together for him now? My brother Alan at that point thought it was a thanks for him. You got a whole book dedicated to you, Alan, so you're not getting anything else. And you also got the worst character in the book called after you, so you'll know not to ask again. But on a different note, I do want to thank my family. They've been incredibly supportive. Mum has baked shortbread for the legions tonight, and I particularly want, this has been a difficult year for us as a family. My daddy should be sitting there, and he's not. And that's hard, and a lot of you's got me through the last year, so thank you very much for that, and thank you especially for my family for keeping me going this last year. Just a couple more. Fellow writers, there's about, I'd say 99% of you are either out writers or pretending that you're not out and about to produce a manuscript. There's no better community in the world than the writing community in Belfast. Not just as people who keep us inspired and keep us creating, but as friends and people who've really got each other's backs in the difficult times. And oh my goodness, the next year for Northern Irish prose in particular is astounding. There's books at the back by some of the world's most exciting writers, I think. Please don't just buy my book tonight. Go and buy Wendy's books there, Rosemary's books there, Bernie's books there. And keep buying Northern Irish writers because they have a lot to say and they're saying it incredibly well at the minute. And we also want to thank Paul's here representing the Arts Council, both a writer and a suit from the Arts Council as well, as you can see tonight. So we're incredibly thankful and grateful for support from the Arts Council. Last thing that I want to say is thank you to you lot. This is the best way to launch a book 2 months after it's already out. So it's already got a lot of love and it's already into its second print. So if you're a hater here tonight, then I don't know what you're doing here. Thank you so much for all of the messages and the responses and the bits of your own stories that you shared as well. It's been incredibly moving and just really, really important to me. I have a wee gift for you all as you go home tonight. As some of you know, I wrote a short story about each of the characters in the book before I began the Raptures. And Bayani's story is over there, which is about his not very pleasant encounter with the Young Farmers Club. So if you've ever been a young farmer, you might resonate with that. And there's also some nice shortbread to enjoy while you're reading it with a cup of tea. That is my... Is there anybody I've forgotten about?
I don't think there's possibly anybody.
Sorry.
Can we have a wee round of applause for everybody who has just supported Jan to get us here tonight? I think all book launches should happen after the book has been launched because you get a chance to read it and look how, it's just so lovely and warm. No one's going to ask you anything awkward, which is great.
Yeah, you're in that position right now, so you bear that in mind. The last thing I wanted to say is there's about 10 people here I don't know, but everybody else I can vouch for being thoroughly wonderful human beings. So if there's somebody you like the look of, please go up and have a chat afterwards. I would love to be going to the wedding of 2 people who met at my book launch in a few years' time. But seriously, there's a lot of super interesting, really wonderful people in this room, so linger afterwards and get a chat in with them.
I think you'd write a great romantic comedy. I would watch that. I think Julia Roberts may be available.
Who's to say I haven't, Hills?
Look forward to that. Jan, would you like to read a little bit from the Raptures for us tonight?
Yep. Well, it's almost like we planned this. I'm going to read from the start because it's almost impossible not to give spoilers if you read more than the first 5 pages. A few people are nodding. I also really like this bit because it's got some nice, the language of kind of County Antrim was very much in my head when I was writing this book and writing the way I speak, and I think you get a sense of that in this passage. So if you haven't read it yet, this is just after Ross dies, and Ross is the first of the kids to die. Spoiler, there's a lot of children dying. Not, as Kate knows, there were originally 14, and then the publishers said, Dan, 11 maybe, but 14 is too many. So there could have been more death. Ross had only just turned 11. He was still a child, though the thought of girls was already pressing. He'd sometimes go through the K's catalogue for pictures of women in bras and pants. He'd yet to touch a girl himself, had yet to taste coffee or travel anywhere in an aeroplane. He'd been looking forward to Lanzarote. It would have been his first time in a foreign place. Poor Ross. It's never easy going first. There's been no talk of the boys passing yet. It'll be mid-morning before the news spreads. In the houses and farms of Ballylack, people are getting on with their everyday doing. They're feeding the cows and drinking tea, watching the telly and heading to bed. There's no expectation that tomorrow will be much different from today. 93 has been an unremarkable year. The summer's shaping up to be equally forgettable. It's neither hot nor particularly damp. It isn't a World Cup year or one for the Olympics. Major's in Downing Street, Clinton's in the White House. Folks aren't sure what to make of him. Keep an eye on that one. He's got notions. There's talk of Clinton wading into the troubles. Word is, he thinks he can sort it out. Let the same fella have a run at it. Better than him have tried and failed. Down south, Ireland win the Eurovision for the umpteenth year in a row. In Your Eyes is the song in question. You'd have a hard time dancing to it, though it's got a catchy hook. Makes a change from the usual earnest shout. Plunk, 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 and words about peace. What are the young ones listening to? Shaggy, Ace of Base, Too Unlimited, feel-good Euro hits. They don't sound half so feel-good, pumping through the tinny speakers of the GAA clubs and community centres where Ulster's youth hang out. Dancing, smoking, drinking cheap vodka decanted into Fanta bottles. No limits. We reach for the sky, the youngsters sing, fists pumping furiously to the beat, black bomber jackets soaking up their sweat. They go buck mad every time No Limits comes on. It's only a tune to them, not the call to arms it could be. No limits indeed. What a load of bollocks. These kids hail from Ocher, Clocher and Cullibaggy. Say it out loud. Cullibaggy. You can practically hear the fences. They couldn't be more limited if they tried. Elsewhere in the province, they're still at it, killing each other with bombs and guns. It's the 23rd or 4th summer of this nonsense. Depends on when you started keeping count. Most folks are fed up with the whole thing. They're adamant the killing must stop. There's war in Bosnia and Afghanistan. There's a brutal one winding up in Rwanda. You can't turn on your telly for seeing dead bodies piled everywhere, blood pulled in the gutters, women howling and getting on. The people here are sick of death. This isn't a third world country. This is Britain, or this is Ireland, or both, or neither, or its own institution peculiar as a maiden aunt. Either way, it's a civilised country. Sure, it's been a whole 2 years since McDonald's arrived.
Thank you, Jan. Jan, is that that extract was a great sort of sense of where this book takes place and what era. We're talking about 1993, rural Northern Ireland. You also have set it within an evangelical Protestant family, within a Protestant community, in a particular place at a particular time. What were you thinking? What were the building blocks when you were trying to put together when it came to making this particular book set in a very particular location and time in history?
I think mostly I was being quite lazy because I was just writing what I know the best, and that is the world that I grew up in, the world that I knew as a child. Hannah's 11 in 1993, I would have been 13, so all of those cultural signifiers, all of those experiences, the Troubles as something in the background maybe, but not forefront, the world of church and church communities, all of that was in the mix. And I guess, like a lot of you growing up, many of us read books in school that didn't really reflect the experiences that we knew. I think the only literature I really read from Northern Ireland back then was Across the Barricades, and it's a great book, and John Lingard has left us a great legacy, but it's a very particularly urban, quite politicised experience, and it wasn't something I was familiar with, so I wanted to write the book that I would have enjoyed when I was Hannah's age or a little bit older, and that's kind of where I started from.
And music really places it in a particular time. I think for all of us who have read the book, there are certain refrains that come back and come back.
This is really weird. One of the joys of getting to travel a wee bit with books, because the fire starters, or some of you may know it as the flamethrowers now, both are fine, has been translated into different European languages, so I get to travel a wee bit, and I often get paired with writers from other difficult places, and like Paul and Wendy will know about this as well. You're like, oh, it's people from Palestine and Bosnia again, us. And one of the signifiers that I thought was really interesting for me, a good friend that I've got to know is the same age as me, and she's from Ukraine, so obviously not in a great place at the minute, but she talked about listening to the same music, making the same mixtapes of like Blur and Britpop and Oasis, and I think sometimes those cultural signifiers, they cross. Like there were kids in Bosnia who were listening to those same songs while we were listening to them here in Belfast, and it just brings it home that those places where conflict and difficult situations are happening are not alien, removed, uncivilized. They're the same as our experience. But that was when it really kind of kicked in for me. All of us, one girl grew up in Bosnia, one in Ukraine, and myself all going, yeah, we were mad into Blur in 1995.
Did you counter with Oasis?
No, never.
No. There's enough trouble. We don't need to be wading into that. There is a lot of Northern Ireland in your writing, and very much so in the Raptures. There's a lovely familiarity if you're from Northern Ireland or you know Northern Ireland, and a lot of the colloquialisms and turns of phrase, which I really loved. It gave me a very strong sense of a distinct sense of place. You are often billed as a NI or Northern Irish writer. What are the pros and cons of being presented in that way?
I think I'll start with the pros, definitely. Like, who wouldn't want to be associated with the rake of incredible writers that have come from this part of the world but are also currently emerging from this part of the world? It has honestly never been a more exciting time, I think, to be a writer from here. So that sense of community and inspiration, and also just like, I was reading an article that Wendy wrote, or an interview last week, where she was asked about, moving her writing beyond East Belfast. And like, really there's no need to, because there's enough going on in East Belfast to keep us all going, to keep you and me and Lucy writing for the next Forever and Glen as well. And I think, where are you going to find anywhere with more history, more politics, more interesting culture happening than right here? It doesn't surprise me that there's a lot of art coming out of this part of the world at the minute. I think the negatives are, the obvious negatives, the stigma, the assumption that perhaps that we will always write about certain topics, and I think it's important to acknowledge that a writer gets to write about whatever they want to write about, and that might mean that they want to directly address those subjects that are more kind of associated with Northern Ireland, or they might want to ignore them entirely. There's a freedom there to write about whatever, and there are some practical limitations. It's why I love Kate so much. You know, I asked her today, you know, do you think I would, you know, make more commercial sense to stop writing about Northern Ireland? I'm not going to do that, folks. But she was like, no, keep writing about what you love to write about. And there has been a thing in the past where publishers have thought that, you know, Northern Ireland was done or no one was interested in it. So I'm very grateful for people like David Park and Glenn Patterson who wrote through that, and Malachy sitting there as well. Sorry, Malachy, didn't see it, but you guys kept on pushing through the really difficult times when it was hard to sell books about Northern Ireland, and we all stand on your shoulders, not literally, thankfully. But yeah, it's not always been easy to be a Northern Irish writer, I think.
Yeah. And one of the things that I loved was some of the language that I loved, like gurning, such a great word. I love saying it and I love reading it. You've spoken recently, Jan, about not wanting to apologise for the language you know, for familiarity. And I know personally, I have found going to other places and feeling like I needed to change the speed of how I spoke or the words that I said in a way to be understood. You've come at that from a less apologetic place.
Yeah, and once again, standing on other people's shoulders. Like, I've said this a number of times in the last 2 weeks, but Anna Burns did us a great service with Milkman in that it's so unapologetically Northern Irish. And it was just like, I'm not going to put a footnote and explain what this is. I'm not going to change the way I tell a story or how I use language. You're getting full throttle Belfast in how we use words and how we tell stories. And I think it did okay. So I don't think we should be apologising. And, you know, I can catch in Mihall's, I hear like Mihall has written a lot in his poetry about language and, you know, a different kind of angle on language, but how we name things and how we respect people's use of language. I think there's room for everything within the canon. But I'm done with putting footnotes, you know, the Good Friday Agreement, hashtag this was a peace agreement written. You know, Google exists, you can go and Google what you don't know, or you might learn something, a word you didn't know before. Like, both Lissy Caldwell and I have used Calerid in stories in the last wee while, and I've now heard other people using Calerid outside of Northern Ireland. I think there's a Scots Gaelic version of it as well, but that's lovely that a word might crawl back into usage that had been on the way out.
And for lots of people, there are words in this book that they've always said, and they're still in contemporary use. They're not historical or aged. That's the everyday language people speak.
And it's lovely. I just finished Louise Kennedy's book there at the Trespasses, her new novel, and she's got something in it about a clatter or something. And I'd forgotten about that one, but such a rich, you know, a clatter of Wayans or something like that.
Jan, recently BBC Radio 3 aired an essay of yours called Trebeks as part of another Northern Ireland series. And in that essay, you touched on the role of women in the evangelical Protestant tradition. And that is a theme that is very much in the Raptures. We see some of that, the thinking through Hannah and a child's perspective, and we also, as the reader, can see that in some of the other members of the community. What makes you circle back to this? What keeps bringing you back to the topic of women within that upbringing and tradition?
I think it's just within conservative religion across the board, often women's voices are unheard, unacknowledged. There's no kind of recourse to a place where they can have any authority. And, you know, I've experienced that myself as a young woman, as an older woman. I've seen it in other people's lives. I think we just need to keep talking about it and trying to change things. And, you know, there are things in this novel that I think people will disagree with, but I've tried to do it in a respectful way, that we might begin a conversation about what it means for women to have a little bit more of a voice within those spaces. One of the lovely things that has happened since this came out is people finding parallels from other world. So a really good friend who grew up in a very conservative Muslim household, and she could see the parallels with how difficult it was for her to find her voice and to be heard. But I want to be respectful as well in what I write too.
And so much of this is also incredibly universal. So as a child, or any of the children in this book, you do get that sense of them not having that control over their own lives, and how they have to press up against that, those limits and the fences that we talked about earlier. So that is something that is just so common, and that's women and people from marginalised backgrounds in so many ways, I think, will relate to that.
Yeah, and as well with the children in particular, I wanted to explore this idea of how much pressure we're putting on the next generation of kids. You know, there was a lot of talk at the start of the novel about these kids being the future of Northern Ireland, and they've inherited problems that they didn't create, and we're expecting them to fix it. And I think we have done that a little bit in Northern Ireland with, you know, the generation that Larry McKee talked about as the ceasefire babies. If, you know, they're going to move forward, they're going to fix things, we'll have integrated education, we, you know, they'll be more tolerant than we were. And it's an enormous pressure to put on young people. We're doing the same with climate activism. Here's a thing that's broke. You didn't break it, but you can fix it. So I wanted to show what that did to these young people. And, you know, surprise, surprise, sorry this is a spoiler, but they get a second chance to recreate, you know, their community. And they don't create a utopia, they just drag the same problems with them, because that's what's been modelled to them. You know, if you want to see change, you need to model it to young people. You can't expect them to pluck it out of nowhere.
Speaking of which, paranormal children, Jan, that's... If anyone is familiar with any of Jan's previous writings, paranormal children is a theme that comes up along with very wry, eccentric older people. There are a couple of tropes, I'm going to say, a classic Jan Carson motif, if you will. You keep coming back to those. What attracts you to those characters, the idea of those that you keep returning to?
I was catching my nephew's eye because I remember 2 books back he was like, what's this one about Auntie Jan, more flying children? So, you know, when you're being typecast by like a 13-year-old, you're in difficult problems. I've really struggled. I think I've just got too much imagination, and I struggle to keep to realism. I need somewhere to park that excessive imagination, and I love those, you know, I grew up on the stories from the Bible where the parables represented different things, the miracles represented different things. I have grown up reading magical realism where, you know, there's such rich allegories in Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Salman Rushdie that are kind of engaging with socio-political themes as well. So it feels natural to create these kind of paranormal children, as you have delightfully coined them. There's some talking cats and like ghost grannies and stuff as well, but they're vehicles for saying things that it would feel too blatant, too kind of obvious to say in a realistic way, but you can play around when they're already dead.
Yep. And I think going back to your previous point about the pressure and the expectation that the following generation is just going to sort everything out, that is something that really struck me in this idea that what if they're not there? Where do the parents and adults take responsibility if they're not around to fix the things that happened before?
Yeah. I love whenever people like Hilary read your book and then they say things in it that you didn't intend, but they're really clever things. It's like I've already had about 5 different interpretations of what the dead kids stand for, and I'm happy to let them stand for all those things. You know, that work away. A book's never like the kind of final full stop. It's always a beginning of a conversation with your readers. They're the ones who make it have the meaning, and I'm happy for you lot to do that, as long as you don't come up with anything offensive.
Yes, a disclaimer. I think you give the readers a lot of credit in the language that you use, that you're free to go and Google if you don't know what it is, or to just let wash over you. And with the place, you may not need to know rural Antrim that well, but you're getting that sense, and you're giving your reader the space to find that meaning for themselves.
Thank you.
Jan, you have written, this is your third novel? I've lost count now because we've covered so many books.
Is it 3? Yeah.
It's 3. Great. Thank you, Kim.
When you say written 3, there's like about 7 that are in the bin that were written.
Yes, that's
but
true.
3 managed to get over the line.
3 excellent that have been published. How did you find writing The Raptures as now an experienced novelist and as someone who writes across a number of other genres?
This was a really easy book to write. I think that wee trope of writing the short stories about the characters first really helped because I'd spent months and months with the kids before I put them into a novel. So I think I wrote the first draft of this in 3 months, and then Hannah was living in the States at the time, so she got it sort of chapter by chapter as it was being written and can now see it's completely different from what she got. So the writing of it was quite easy. But I also think it's probably the closest to me book that I've read. There's a lot of me in Hannah, and probably a lot of me in Granda Pete as well. So yeah, there's bits of it that were quite difficult to write emotionally, but the actual writing process felt smoother. And I guess like for all of you who've written books in the past, the first one just feels like you're pushing an elephant up the hill and you will never be able to do it again, as do the next 13 really, to be honest. But you begin to learn the rhythms of like, when you get to 20,000 words, you will hate it and you will think it's rubbish and want to throw it in the bin. Kelly's smiling at me. And you push through that and it gets better after that point. But the first time you do it, you think it is really rubbish and I'm really going to throw it in the bin. So there are kind of, like, you get a bit more match fit the more books that you write, I think, just to know what's going to come and how to push through it.
It's that kind of hateful word that we've been talking about a lot over the last 2 years of resilience. You become more resilient and prepared for that difficult stage.
All with a book in a way. Like there's a point where it feels like it's laughing at you, and then there's a point where you feel like really this is the worst thing that's ever been written, and then sometimes there's a point where you think this is the best thing that's ever been written in the history of books. So you're just trying to find the resilience to keep ploughing on through and get to a point where you've got a draft to work with.
Yeah. And putting the graft in.
Yeah.
This book, again, Jan, I think has some kind of prescient abilities. The Firestarters came out and we did have a summer of heat and turbulence, we could say, in Belfast. And Jan, you wrote The Raptures and the COVID pandemic arrived. Now, I don't want to say it's your fault. Do you have some explaining to do?
I don't know, but I'm just going to be really, really careful about what I write next. An economic boom and 10 years of peace and prosperity for the North, where everybody gets along.
Great, thank you. Much appreciated.
It'll be a bestseller.
You did have the strange experience, but I think not unique. Certainly, so many writers and artists had similar experiences of creating something, and then as part of the editing process, that was happening when you were spending obviously time in isolation, when we just weren't able to see each other during the pandemic. Did that change the book in any way?
Yes. Like I don't know how many redrafts this went through, and even just I think lots of us have experienced this, the distance of trying to work creatively with a team of people, because with a book at that stage it is a team. There's like a couple of editorial people, like an agent, yourself, PR people, and you can't sit down with a bottle of wine and thrash it out or even be in the same space. It felt very fragmented, and I think we've also all been negotiating people not being in great form or having life stuff happen, and the process of trying to be creative for the last 2 years I think has been exhausting. So props to anybody who wrote or created anything at all in the last 2 years. Books, artwork, babies, whatever you made in the last 2 years, well done to you to have brought anything to fruition, because it was difficult.
Yeah, it's lovely to have the opportunities now to have these events in person and have the opportunity of sharing that with people, because I know there are lots of writers who didn't get that, lots of artists who didn't get that for the last couple of years. I'm really glad we're able to do that now. Shall we take some questions from anybody in the audience? If you have a question, you're here with us in the room tonight. If you want to put your hand up, and then we will invite you to come to the mics. There are a couple of mics placed around the room, and it would be brilliant if you could ask your question into the mic so everyone can hear you. Anybody like to kick us off? I will just check if we have any questions from... No, Jan, it's just you and I to chat on.
Do you want to talk about casualty?
I'm happy to talk about casualty.
I think now in the future, whenever there's like no questions from the audience, you should just be allowed to talk about whatever your subject of choice is. So 10 minutes of Inspector Morse, everybody. Or go on, Freya. Do you want to come up to the mic if that's okay?
I was asking you questions earlier in the week for an Irish Times podcast, but one of the things that I find really interesting is that I grew up in that same sort of rural environment, and there's in Northern Ireland, and there's something really interesting about hearing that, about seeing that reflected in literature, because you're right, it wasn't really, and I wonder, have people come up to you and said that sort of thing, made that observation? And are you, I don't want to overdo this, but are you sort of contributing somehow to a greater understanding of, I suppose, Northern Ireland in general and the language of Northern Ireland, but also that urban-rural, that it's not just about Belfast, or it's not just about Derry? Sorry, I'm saying this in a room in Belfast. I'll probably get lynched. But
no. I think it's a great question, Freya, and I think things are changing. Like, there's much more diversity in the voices who are telling the stories about Northern Ireland now, and some of that diversity is moving away from the urban and exploring the rural. If you haven't listened to Michal's essay on Radio 3, there's a lot about rural culture in it, and it's brilliant. Michal, what's it called? The Art of Staying. It's brilliant. You can get it on BBC Sounds. Carrie O'Doherty's book, there's a lot exploring the rural experience there. And I think these are voices that haven't been heard and have a lot to contribute to the story. And I have had lots of people coming up, mostly from that side of the language thing, of going, oh boys, I haven't heard that term in a while, or we used to always talk about that. And that can feel like a very thin, not important experience, but being able to recognise yourself in art and culture is a huge thing, because it kind of gives across the idea that your story has meaning and validity and value, and we don't always just have to listen to the people in Stormont or the people who are given vox pops from Belfast or Derry, that it might be good to listen to somebody from Auchnacloy or Aucher or wherever as well. And also, yes, Dom's amazing play that was on in the Lyric last week. I love that you were mentioning bringing in lots of rural voices there as well. And I learned a few townlands that I'd never heard of before as well. So I'm hoping things are changing, and if you're working on stuff that is set outside Belfast and Derry, brilliant. Can't wait to read it coming out.
Thanks, Freya. We've
Ian?
got another question here.
Yes, please. In the blog you wrote just before the book was published, you said that you took the best of the novel that you were going to do on Bob Dylan and put it into this novel.
Yeah.
Now, the immediate comparison of what's Bobby Lack's got to do with Dylan escapes maybe, but to the extent I had to look back and make sure I hadn't made that up.
Yeah.
So what were the themes that were the same? I mean, an artist takes their inspiration and goes somewhere, so...
Yeah, no, there's actually, thanks Ian, that's a great question. He asked, I'd been working on a novel about Bob Dylan called Roundabouts, and it probably will sadly never come to be, but I took a lot of it and put it into the Raptures. The novel about Bob Dylan was actually about Dylan's teenage years in Hibbing, which is, if you know where Hibbing is, it's in the arse end of nowhere. And I was just fascinated by how a person so different from that community that he grew up in could emerge and become Bob Dylan. And I went up and spent some time in Hibbing and saw his house and his school, and he really was an outlier. Like, it's a kind of working class mining community up there, and suddenly we get Bob Dylan out of that. So I was more interested in how do these kind of outliers emerge from places where maybe there isn't a tradition of creativity or a tradition of kind of philosophical thought. And that was the aspects that kind of came out and went into the Raptures. Like, I think Hannah is a wee questioner and a wee free spirit, and who knows where it comes from, but there it is. As was Bob Dylan at 7 or 8. I got to talk to some of people who went to high school with him, and they said he was always like that, always pushing buttons and asking questions. So that's how it wasn't going to be a novel about the Bob that we know. It was more young Bob before he became Bob Dylan.
You can tell me if I'm wrong, but it strikes me that this is a book of rebellion against the religious upbringing. And the intriguing thing about that for me is that the book concludes with a kind of an endorsement of the miraculous. So we end up with a demonstration of the miraculous alongside a rejection of well, not even institutional but formal religion. So is this your rebellion book?
Thanks, Malachi. You always trusted Malachi to stir things. Thanks. I mean, what I light on there is your use of the term religion. And I think, yes, it is a book that questions religion, but I think it's a book about faith. And I've always separated the two and said there is plenty of room in Northern Ireland for faith. I think we're done with religion and religiosity. I think we're absolutely done with it and the damage that it has caused here. But people of deep faith and integrity, like Grandpa Pete, I could do with a lot more Grandpa Petes in Northern Ireland, and I guess I probably wrote him because that's what I wanted to see the place populated with. And I also do, like, you know, I'm drawn to the flying children and the, you know, what was it you called them? Paranormal children. But I'm not going to kind of pass over the possibility of the miraculous either. And I think some of us, if we go around, we've had miraculous encounters in this place, whether you call them miracles and you put a kind of religious bent on it, or you just call them changes and just beautiful pieces of humanity that you didn't think were possible. We've had conversations about some of them, Malachi, so I know. So it's a book that doesn't like religion, but I don't think it's against faith. Does that make sense?
Fair enough, yeah.
Yeah, we will talk about this in depth more, I think. I think Stephen had a question. Yeah. Stephen's got the best jumper on tonight.
Of the kids that didn't quite make the cut, who was the hardest to let go?
Jan. Can I just say, this is, Stephen and I had this conversation climbing Cave Hill on Saturday, so he knows fine, right? Like, to be honest, I'm going to actually change my answer. There was a little boy in it that was, he was from a very strong DUP background, and he was beginning to realise he was gay, so he got cut, and I was sad to see him go. But the one that I feel the worst about is the teacher's story got cut. And dear lover, she didn't really have, she gets 2 lines in the novel, but she, you know, she was responsible for all of those children, and she also was from Aucher, which, like, she really deserved a backstory. So I think actually I might do something. You're getting Bayani's story tonight, but I might try and do something with those backstories just because I feel like they have a right to be heard. Thank you, and I still love your jumper. So
we have maybe time for one more question.
Oh, who's the stranger?
You do have translation deals for this one, but I think it's too soon for the process. But I wondered for fire starters if you had conversation, like what needed to be translated most to your translators, if that ever came up, if there's anything that was like, yeah, indecipherable.
That was a question about translation. If anyone has read the fire starters, the bit the translators all struggled with at the start was the first kind of, this is Belfast, this is not Belfast, you need to call a spade a spade. It's just one kind of piece of wordplay after another, and a lot of them really struggled with it. And it's a translation issue, but it's a Northern Irish issue where a lot of our words they mean different things. And in that book in particular, I wanted to show kind of how nebulous language is and how difficult it is to pin it down. That, you know, we've all told a story or been told a story that means something to one side and means something different to the other side. And that sometimes comes right down to particular words and the resonance of them. Absolute nightmare to translate it into Spanish. My poor Spanish translator, who has become quite a good friend, and we sat for ages over coffee, and she was just like, but there isn't a way of saying three things at once with one word. And I was like, but there is in Belfast. Like, even, you know, there's a bit in the Firestarters about yo, and it can be like kind of, oh, it's an exclamation of joy, or it can be sarcasm, or it can be a put down, or it's a word that means lots of things at once. I think we're masters at language. Don't know why we fall out over language so much, because I think it is one of our skill forms. If it was an Olympic sport, Northern Irish people would be really good at language.
I think we could start pinning awards out. Yeah. Folks, thank you so much for your attention tonight. Thank you, Jan, for your wonderful answers tonight. Ferna for the music. Thank you to the Joint Irish Secretary, for hosting us tonight and making this event possible. A final reminder that books will be available for sale from No Alibis over in the corner. Jan is very happy to sign books, so if you just give her a minute to get set up, take a deep breath, and she will crack on. I'll lend her a pen.
I'm really bad with names at things like this, so even if you are my mother, could you be like, Mum? Because, yes, just, I don't want to insult anyone, but even if I know you really well, I might have forgotten your name tonight, sorry.
Please do introduce yourself, and all that remains for me to say is thank you so much, Jan Carson.
Thank you so much. I'm Laurence. Thank you all. What a wonderful evening. Thank you, Hilary. You've thanked everybody already, Jan, so there's very little left for me to do. Thank you, Hilary, for that wonderful conversation. Thank you. I would like to thank Ferna also for just starting the evening off with such a wonderful verve. And thank you, Jan, as well. I feel, Jan, you've set the bar for the evening's success very high, that if there isn't a marriage out of this, that in some way we've fallen short. So I don't know if the people online should be grateful or should be jealous that they're not here, but they should certainly be jealous because we'll be walking away with that wonderful story, and we'll be walking away with shortbread and tray bakes. So please stay and enjoy that and enjoy the drinks and get your book signed and introduce yourself. And thank you all so much for coming tonight.